Ecosystem.
In an ecosystem, all living organisms such as plants, animals, microorganisms, and human beings, as well as the physical surroundings, interact with each other. Ecosystem comprises of biotic community of plants, animals, and microorganisms. These different biotic and physical environment which are associated with them and form an interacting system called ecosystem. Thus, ecosystem means coordination of all living and non-living factors in a given area of the earth which occurs due to interaction between organism and the environment.
Types of ecosystems.
Based on the kind of habitat, there are two main types of ecosystem. A. Terrestrial or land ecosystems. These ecosystems are found on land. The following types are recognized under this. 1. Forest ecosystem. 2. Grassland or prairie ecosystem. And 3. Desert ecosystem. B. Aquatic or water ecosystems. These ecosystems are found in water. The types are recognized under this. 1. River, lotic or running water ecosystem. 2. Pond, lentic or standing water ecosystem. 3. Lake, lentic or standing water ecosystem. And 4. Marine or seawater ecosystem.
Ecosystems are also classified as natural ecosystems and artificial ecosystems. Forests, grasslands, deserts, rivers, ponds, lakes, seas, etc. are all natural ecosystems. Crop fields, gardens, aquarium, etc. are man-made or artificial ecosystems. Though these are man-made, it is considered as ecosystems because of the interaction between different biotic and abiotic components present there. For instance, in a garden we can see different plants, insects, birds, animals, etc. which form the biotic components. These are interdependent. Their growth, reproduction, and other activities are also dependent on various abiotic factors. Hence, we can call it as an ecosystem. Similarly, in an aquarium we can find aquatic plants, fishes, small aquatic organisms, etc. that form the biotic components. The aquatic plants releases oxygen, which is utilized by the fishes and other organisms. The small organisms feed on algae, and the small organisms are fed upon by the fishes. The wastes released by the organisms are decomposed by bacteria present in it. The decomposed matter forms the nutrients for the aquatic plants to grow. The growth, reproduction, and other activities of the organisms are also dependent on various abiotic factors. We can find that the water in the aquarium turns turbid after some days. This is due to the accumulation of wastes. But in a natural ecosystem like pond, the wastes are decomposed off by the microorganisms and made available to the aquatic plants. Thus, it forms a self-sustaining system. Organisms in an ecosystem. Autotrophs. The organisms which prepare their own food from simple substances are called autotrophs. Most of the plants, green algae, and some bacteria are the examples of autotrophs. The green plants, algae, and some bacteria utilize carbon dioxide and water as raw materials and convert them into organic compounds like carbohydrates, mainly glucose, during photosynthesis. This process takes place in the presence of sunlight and photosynthetic pigments like chlorophyll. Oxygen is released in the atmosphere as a byproduct. In plants, the unused carbohydrates are converted to starch and they are stored as reserved food. Let us now discuss some of the characteristics of autotrophs. The autotrophs prepare their food through the process of photosynthesis. Plants are also called the producers of the world. Do you know why plants are called the producers of the world? Producers are the organisms that produce their own food in the presence of sunlight through a process called photosynthesis. They convert solar energy into chemical energy. As the production of food by trapping solar energy is done by plants, they are called producers of an ecosystem. Heterotrophs. The organisms which cannot synthesize their own food and depend upon other organisms for their food requirement are called heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are called the consumers of the world. All animals, some bacteria and fungi are classified under heterotrophs. Consumers are the organisms that depend on the producers directly or indirectly for their food requirements. Man and all other animals are examples of consumers. Consumers are further classified into herbivores or primary consumers, carnivores or secondary consumers, apex carnivores or tertiary consumers, omnivores, decomposers, and parasites. Herbivores or primary consumers. Primary consumers are the consumers that obtain their food directly by eating the producers. Herbivores are known as primary consumers. Primary consumers are also called first-level consumers. Herbivores are the animals that eat only plants or their products such as leaves, grains, fruits, grasses, etc. as their food. Grasshoppers, seed-eating birds, elephants, and fruit bats are all examples of primary consumers. Carnivores or secondary consumers. Secondary consumers are the consumers that feed directly on the primary consumers. Secondary consumers are also called second-level consumers. Carnivores are often referred to as secondary consumers. Carnivores are the animals that eat other animals as their food. Lion, tiger, wolf, hawk, snakes, and frogs are all carnivores. Apex carnivores or tertiary consumers. The final feeders that no one directly eats are called the top or the apex carnivores. Tiger, leopard, and eagle are the examples of apex carnivores. Apex carnivores are also called tertiary consumers. Omnivores. Organisms that feed on both autotrophs as well as heterotrophs are called omnivores. Animals like dogs, crows, and bears are examples of omnivores. Human beings are an excellent example of omnivores. They consume vegetables, which are of plant origin, and also meat and fish, which are of animal origin. Decomposers or saprophytes. The organisms which obtain their food from decaying organic matter of dead plants, animals, etc. are called saprophytes or saprotrophs. Saprophytic organisms feed on the dead and decaying matter. Hence, they may act as decomposers in nature. Saprophytes are often referred to as decomposers. Plants like Monotropa, fungi such as yeast, molds, mucor, and mushrooms, bacteria like Bacillus subtilis, and insects are all examples of saprotrophs. Parasites. Parasites are the organisms that cannot live independently. They live inside or on the body surface of another organism called the host and obtain their food or nourishment from the host. Worms that live in the guts of animals and fleas that live on the skin of animals, like the dogs, are all examples of parasites. Food chain. The sequential process of eating and being eaten is called as a food chain. Food chain is a linkage of organisms within an ecosystem in which each link feeds on the link present before it and is fed upon by the link present after it. Only the first link in a food chain is producer. The rest of the links are all consumers, be it primary, secondary, or tertiary consumers. Let us consider a simple grassland food chain. In a grassland, the food chain begins with green grass, which acts as the producer. The grass is eaten by a herbivore like a deer. The deer, in turn, is consumed by a lion, which is a carnivore. This food chain has 3 organisms or 3 steps. Grass, eaten by the deer, which in turn is eaten by the lion. Let us take a look at a food chain in an aquatic ecosystem such as a pond. The food chain begins with the primary producers, the algae. The algae are eaten by protozoa, which are herbivores. The protozoa in turn are eaten by the small fishes, which are the carnivores. The big fishes or the larger carnivores feed upon the small fishes. This aquatic food chain has 4 steps and can be represented as algae eaten by the protozoa, which are eaten by the small fishes, which in turn are eaten by the large fishes. Food web. Similar kind of organisms may occur in more than one food chain. They eat more than one type of food to satisfy their requirements. A plant of a particular species can serve as food for a variety of herbivores. An insect may eat the leaves of different kinds of plants and in turn may be eaten by either a frog, a lizard, a bird, or even a mammal. No food chain can operate in isolation. Individual food chains are interconnected in a complex way. Different food chains intertwine with one another to form an intricate network. If this network was to be represented in the form of a diagram, we would get a complex, branched web called food web. A network of a large number of food chains existing in an ecosystem is called a food web. Let us understand a food web showing food relationships between organisms living in a grassland ecosystem. There are about 6 food chains interconnected in this food web. The food web begins with the plants and ends with the top carnivore, the vulture. In the first food chain, the plants are eaten by the grasshoppers, and the grasshoppers in turn are eaten up by the vulture. In the second food chain, the plants are eaten by the rabbits. The rabbits are then consumed by the vultures. In the third food chain, the plants are eaten by the mice. The mice are then eaten by the vultures. In the fourth food chain, the plants are eaten by the mice are eaten by snakes, and the snakes in turn are eaten by the vultures. In the fifth food chain, the plants are eaten by the grasshoppers, and the grasshoppers in turn are eaten by the frog. The frog is eaten by the snake, and the snake is consumed by the vulture. Finally, in the sixth food chain, the plants are eaten by the small birds, which in turn are eaten up by the vultures. Trophic level. Each step or level of the food chain at which the transfer of food occurs is called a trophic level. Trophic levels can also be described as a particular position that an organism occupies in a food chain. All food chains begin with the green plants or the producers. So, the plants or the producers constitute the first trophic level. The herbivores or the primary consumers that feed upon plants constitute the second trophic level. The herbivores are next fed upon by the carnivores or the secondary consumers. They constitute the third trophic level. Finally, the large carnivores, also called the top carnivores or the tertiary consumers, form the fourth trophic level. The trophic levels can thus be represented as a trophic level 1, the producers, trophic level 2, the primary consumers, trophic level 3, the secondary consumers, and trophic level 4, the tertiary consumers. A given living organism may not necessarily occupy the same trophic level at all times. Consider a food chain comprising of grass, rabbit, and a snake. In this food chain, the snake feeds on rabbit and is present at the third trophic level. Now, consider a relatively long food chain comprising of grass, grasshopper, frog, and snake. In this food chain, however, the snake feeds on frog and occupies the fourth trophic level. We can thus see that a given organism may occupy a different trophic level in different food chains. Energy flow in an ecosystem. In a food chain, along with food, transfer of energy also takes place from one trophic level to the other. The flow of energy that takes place along a food chain is called energy flow. All the energy used by living organisms is obtained from the sun. The solar energy enters the living components through the autotrophs or the green plants, where it gets converted into chemical energy. However, only 1% of the total energy is actually captured by the green plants. The food energy produced by the plants is partially utilized by them for their growth and development. A major part of it is lost as heat energy. The plants are then eaten up by the primary consumers, the herbivores, and the energy stored in the plants is transferred to these organisms. A part of the energy is used by the herbivores for activities like digestion, growth, and reproduction. Again, most of the energy is lost to the environment in the form of heat. When the herbivores are consumed by the carnivores, a part of the energy is used up by the carnivores for their metabolic activities and growth, while most of it is released as heat energy. There is therefore a gradual decline in the amount of energy as one moves up to each higher trophic level. This is because at each level, energy is lost in the form of heat. The loss of energy in the food chains is explained by a law which states that only 10% of the energy entering a particular trophic level of organisms is available for transfer to the next higher trophic level. If we diagrammatically represent the total energy trapped from sunlight by the producers and the amount of energy that gets passed on to each trophic level, a pyramidal figure will be obtained. This figure is called an energy pyramid or pyramid of energy. The energy pyramid shows a glance of how energy travels up a food chain. Most decomposers, for example bacteria and fungi, live on dead and decaying plant and animal bodies. In the process of feeding, they use the energy left in the dead matter to carry out their life activities. They break down the complex organic compounds present in the dead organisms into simpler substances that easily mix with air, water, or soil. The simpler substances are then consumed by the plants and finally reach the beginning of the food chain. Decomposers are known as the crucial biotic factors of an ecosystem. Do you know why? Well, if decomposers were not present in an ecosystem, the nutrients which had entered the ecosystem would remain trapped forever in the food chains. A lesser quantity of nutrients would circulate in the ecosystem. The waste matter would get piled up without decomposition. Due to their major role in decomposition of matter, decomposers are known as crucial biotic factors of an ecosystem. It is said that the flow of energy in an ecosystem is unidirectional. Do you know how? Let us proceed to study this. Sun is the ultimate source of energy for all life forms. The solar energy that is converted by the autotrophs into food energy cannot be reconverted into solar energy, and the energy that passes from the herbivores to the carnivores can never go back to the herbivores. The energy lost as heat cannot be returned to the plants and reused during photosynthesis. That is why the flow of energy through a food chain is always unidirectional.